Here's a fact about you that almost nobody stops to think about. You are the only kind of human on Earth. There are billions of us, but only one kind, one species. Every person you have ever met is the same species as you. That feels normal. It is not normal. For almost the entire history of our species, it was flatly untrue. 70,000 years ago, there were at least four kinds of human alive at the same time. Not four tribes, four species. Widen the lens and more than a dozen kinds of human have walked this planet. Some tall, one barely a meter high. So the obvious story is the one you were taught. We were smarter, we were stronger, we won, they lost. Survival of the fittest. That story is wrong in almost every part. And the evidence that proves it isn't in the ground at all. It's inside your body right now. So why are humans the only human species left? There were other kinds of people? Lots, Pebble. The Smithsonian recognizes 7 other species of Homo besides us. Count more loosely and you get to around 21. We've dug up the remains of more than 6,000 individuals, across more than a dozen species of early human. That's not a fringe theory, that's a very full graveyard. And the number is fuzzy on purpose, which brings Ivy in early this time. 7 or 21? That's not a rounding error. That's you not knowing what a species even is. She's right, and it's worth being honest about. Species is a line humans drew, and living things don't always respect it. The textbook test is whether two groups can have fertile young together. Hold on to that, because later in this episode it detonates. So the count depends on where you draw lines through a family tree that was never tidy. But the core fact survives every version of the argument. We were not alone, not for most of our history. And that has been true far longer than the alternative. So who were they? Start with the ones you've heard of, the Neanderthals. Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, right up until about 40,000 years ago. Then the Denisovans across Asia. We know them mostly from DNA, and we'll come back to how that happened, because it's the best story in this episode. Now the ones nobody tells you about. On the Indonesian island of Flores lived a human species about a meter tall. Their brains were about a third the size of yours, and they still made stone tools and hunted. Small brain, real technology. They probably shrank because of where they lived. Islands do that. Limited food generation after generation and a population gets smaller. It's called island dwarfism. They lasted on that island until roughly 50,000 years ago, which, in the scale of this story, is yesterday. On Luzon in the Philippines, another one, Homo luzonensis, from roughly 67 to 50,000 years ago, found in a cave known from a handful of bones and teeth. And in South Africa, deep inside a cave system, more than 1,500 bones from at least 15 individuals of a species called Homo naledi. Their brains were roughly chimpanzee-sized, and they may have been deliberately placing their dead deep in that cave, which, if it holds up, is extraordinary, and the one that should humble us most. Homo erectus lasted from nearly 2 million years ago until maybe 110,000 years ago. Do the maths on that. They ran for well over 1 million years. We've managed 300,000. They outsurvived us many times over, and we call them primitive. Line them all up and it stops being a list. It's a world. Tall ones, small ones, stocky ones, spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia all at once. But we were the clever ones, right? That's Gramps' whole worldview. In his telling, they were shambling brutes. Grunting. Dim. Basically animals we swatted aside. That picture is 100 years old. It was wrong when it was invented. And the evidence has been demolishing it for decades. And ask why that story is so appealing. Because it makes us the hero, a species that came out on top because it deserved to. That's a very comfortable thing to believe. Start with the skull. Neanderthal brains were as big as ours. Some were bigger. They made tools with real technique. They controlled fire. They survived Ice Age Europe, which we would not have managed without them showing us how it's done. They buried their dead. We covered that in the medicine episode, a Neanderthal man who lived a decade with one arm because his people kept him alive. And in Croatia, they took eagle talons, cut them free, polished them and strung them into an ornament. 130,000 years ago. That's jewelry. That's symbolic thought. So no, Gramps, not brutes, people, with fire, tools, ornaments, and care for their sick. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. In Europe, we overlapped with them for more than 5,000 years. 5,000 years of sharing a continent. That's longer than all of recorded history. These weren't strangers we met once. They were neighbors for hundreds of generations. How do you know all this from old bones? Mostly we don't. Bones tell you shape. They don't tell you who someone was related to. For a century, that was a hard ceiling. Then, in a Siberian cave, someone found a finger bone, just a fragment, a pinky, nothing much to look at. Anyone looking at it would have shrugged. But by then it was possible to pull DNA out of something that old and read it. And the DNA didn't match us. It didn't match Neanderthals either. It was a whole population of humans nobody knew had ever existed. We called them Denisovans, after the cave. A species discovered not from a skeleton, not from a skull, but from a single fingertip. Their line split off from ours more than 500,000 years ago. And the work that made this possible won a Nobel Prize in 2022. For years we had their genome and almost no bones. A ghost with a complete instruction manual. Then in 2025, a skull already sitting in a collection was confirmed as one of theirs. So Ivy's earlier complaint gets a proper answer. We're not eyeballing bones and guessing anymore. We're reading the actual code. Which brings us to what that code actually said. And it broke the story everyone had been telling. When they compared the Neanderthal genome to living people, they found Neanderthal DNA. In us, in people walking around today. If your ancestry is from outside Africa, roughly 1 to 2% of your genome is Neanderthal. Not metaphorically, actually. And because different people carry different pieces, about 40% of the entire Neanderthal genome is still out there, scattered across living human beings. The Denisovans, too, people of Melanesian ancestry, carry 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. Their ancestors met and had children. And to be clear about what that means, those differences just track where somebody's ancestors happen to walk. That's all. Nothing more is being said here. Then the find that stops everyone. A girl who lived 90,000 years ago. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. A first-generation child of two different human species, not a distant blend, her actual parents. So now go back to that definition we lit a fuse under. Different species aren't supposed to be able to do this. And here's the reversal. They didn't lose to us. We didn't wipe them out and march on alone. We absorbed them. The other human species didn't just vanish off the edge of the world. A measurable part of them is sitting in the body of most people watching this. They're not gone. They're diluted. There's a difference, and it matters enormously. And the pieces that stuck weren't random. A lot of the archaic DNA we kept sits near immune genes, the machinery that fights infection. Which makes sense. They'd lived in those places for hundreds of thousands of years. They'd already met the local diseases. Marrying in meant inheriting the answers. So when you shrug off an infection, some of that defense may have been handed to you by people your species is supposed to have destroyed. Now the honest part, and it's bigger than usual, we do not know why they went. Competition is one idea, climate is another. The Ice Age swung hard and their populations were small. Disease is a third, absorption is a fourth. Most likely it wasn't one of them. It was all four, in different places over thousands of years. Extinction is rarely a single event. Notice what I have not said. I haven't said we killed them. There's no good evidence of a war between human species, and plenty of evidence we had children together. And picture the end of it, because somebody lived it. Somewhere in Europe there was a last Neanderthal, a final person of that kind. They almost certainly didn't know it. Nobody announces the end of a species. It just gets quieter, over generations, until one day a valley that held people holds nobody. For some of them, we can't even prove we ever met. Flores and Luzon are remote islands. Our ancestors may simply have arrived after they'd already gone. And then there are the ghosts. Statistical traces in living genomes that point at whole human populations we have never found a single bone of. We know they existed because they left DNA in us. We have no idea what they looked like, where exactly they lived, or what to call them. There are branches of the human family we will only ever know as a smudge in somebody's blood. So come back to now. 7 billion people, and every single one the same species as you. For 300,000 years, that was not the human condition. There was always somebody else. Another kind of people over the next ridge. Somebody who made fire differently, buried their dead differently, looked at you across a valley and understood exactly what you were, because they were one too. That ended somewhere around 40,000 years ago. And on the scale of this story, 40,000 years is a blink. We are a species in an unusual situation, and we've been in it so briefly that we've mistaken it for the way things have always been. Nana would put it better than me. She'd say the ones who are gone aren't gone while somebody still carries them. And that's not sentiment here. It's literally true, written into the chemistry of most people watching this video. You are not the winner of a competition. You're what's left after a family merged. The last kind of human, carrying pieces of all the others. So we've worked out who they were and what happened to them. But I still haven't told you the simplest thing of all. What any of these people actually did with their time. What did an ordinary day look like? That story's one tap away. I'm the Ancient Bro. You're in good company.